Good morning. Here at Made to Walk, we are going to be walking through bereavement training. And I know that this can be a really tough subject to try to figure out the right way to approach loss. What are good things to say, bad things to say, how to deal with it internally. There's a lot of different avenues to address. And so I want to be able to dive in. The first thing to know about loss is that not all loss is equal. And so I've talked about this in different trainings. It's very comfortable for us to want to exchange experiences with people who are going through something that maybe you feel like you have something to add to that. The problem is that oftentimes it can be taken as an insult, or it can really disconnect the person from sharing because they'll instantaneously think in their mind, those two things are not the same. So, for example, in this particular situation, you may be speaking to someone who's lost a child, and someone may say, I know the pain of loss. I've also lost a grandparent. However, these two things are not the same. And a person will shut down from communicating or opening up if they feel like you just don't get it. So, the safest thing to do is to not try to compare. Also, we want to address the idea that all loss doesn't look the same. So it may be messy for some people, and it may come with silence in that shock period. It may come with some obscene anger, these rage filled moments that come from anxiety, not from a stage of anger itself. It could come with numbness. It's going to really look different for different people. So we want to be very conscientious of how we are judging people in their cycle of grief. As people learn to express their different forms of grief, it may look differently from a state of region or religions or cultures. And so, what may seem normal for you, or what may seem like something that you would want in your funeral, may not necessarily be something they're accustomed to in their family or in their culture. And so, we want to withhold any kind of suggestions unless that person is asking for direct referrals. Like, do you know a good funeral home? Do you know how to submit an obituary, those kinds of things. Those are things that are straightforward that we can address and we can have conversations about without it being subjective. You want to steer away from anything that is subjective in these times. Time can be misinterpreted by sudden or opposed to extended illness. So, in other words, if you expect someone to die, let's just say they have terminal cancer, people oftentimes assume that saying platitudes like, well, at least you had time to say goodbye, or at least they lived a long life, or at least you had the courtesy of being able to let go, that those things make a loss easier. However, not always. Sometimes people struggle with the idea that a person had to struggle, that it wasn't instantaneous, that there was pain involved, or that they had a false sense of hope from a doctor, or other forms of personal guilt, or just reflection that they are struggling with. So don't just assume that because they had time to say goodbye that it makes things easier. The other part of that aspect is that when it's sudden, when it's someone who's taken their life, there's two different sides to that. One is that sometimes it can be very difficult, and obviously they can feel a lot of shame or confusion as to, how did I not know, or what did I miss, what could I have done differently. There is an aspect of this where if the person was struggling with severe depression, if they were struggling mentally, if they were struggling with addictions, if they were really neurotic at times, they can almost feel a sense of relief, unfortunately. And then what tends to happen is the guilt from relief. Like, why am I not grieving the way that I feel like I should be grieving? So just be very cautious that the way it looks to us is not something that we may be seeing the whole picture. So if they look like they're doing well, that could be very true, but then they might be asking the question of, why am I doing so well? And it may not come until a series of cycle time, which means, let's just say, for example, a child was too young to remember the death, but let's say she's approaching her wedding day or he's approaching a graduation. Those are key moments where you have to be conscientious of this might be a time where they're reflecting on the loss. There are stages of grief. These are commonly known, but I realize that a lot of times in Christian culture, we do not discuss them. They are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. We want to learn how to listen and to not advise during times of grief, because simply feeling like it's a safe place to be heard is the most important thing. We want to listen for very specific words like, can you tell me more? Or what should I do? And then reflect on the idea that there are not perfect standard steps in grieving that, oh, well, this is what you do next. This is the A, B, and C. It's going to look differently for everybody. And that it is okay that they get it wrong sometimes, that they have to create space to know that they're not always going to get it right, especially when you've lost someone that was a partner in life, whether that be a mom you were really close to, a dad you were really close to, or a spouse. They can oftentimes feel this void of connection of when I would normally discuss this with that person. And so they're going to have a time period to process that. It's also really important that they are given permission to remember those individuals. I think people oftentimes think I have to just turn it off. I have to move on. I have to keep going. And the truth of the matter is that those memories, that existence that you had with that person is still very real and it's still very alive. And so it's okay to feel comfortable, writing letters and thinking about conversations that if I had talked to my dad about this, what would he have told me to do? Or if I had talked to my husband about this, what would he have advised me? Those things are safe for people to express. Okay, let's talk a little bit about management. If you are internal within an organization and you're wondering what are the policies in place for bereavement, what should we be doing to be more effective in having these conversations? The first obvious piece of advice is to have time off policies and to teach management to expect these. So, in other words, when we need to delegate off work, because a person needs to have several days off, that it is not met with resistance or resilience that it's really them taking it on for someone else, that they are able to understand and be uh, really a partner in that system and be very caring about that instead of being like, oh, great, now I have to take on more work. So that only comes with setting those expectations early of saying, hey, if anybody ever needs bereavement time off, this is the system, this is how it'll work, and it will be temporary, understanding that there will be an end date to it. Do not allow financial or legal decisions to be decided or signed by an individual in grief. This is very vital, especially somebody who deals with legalities or financial aspects, because errors can happen. People cannot realize that they are still in shock or that they are in a state of grief, and they can make errors or commit to things that they didn't understand the ramifications of, and they're actually not legally binding. So we want to be very, very cautious that we are not making final decisions in that state. Learning how to provide a clear, private process for notifying HR or managers about the loss that this person or yourself has experienced is very important as well, because in the workplace, uh, somewhere between 15% and 24% of employees even know whether or not their employment has things in place for bereavement, or even feels that they would be supportive in any capacity if they were in a state of loss. And so we need to make sure that we communicate before something happens that, hey, if you ever go through something, these are the steps that we will take to support you. And these are the ways that you can let me know. offer phased returns. So don't expect like a hard return. So if they get 3 days, that you don't expect them to be full capacity on day one returning, or create flexible hours. Maybe the first day they start back at a third of the day, and the next day is half day, and you work your way up to what you can see that they are managing well. Because managing their workload is very important to the success of the organization, more so than just being back at full capacity, because it can be very difficult if a person comes back too quickly and is handed too much too early, and they start to make errors, or more importantly, they start to feel incredibly overwhelmed, and then they take more sick days because they are just not fully addressing their mental state at the time. And then create check-ins. I think every manager should be conscientiously aware of when people take time off for important anniversaries. So if you know that someone has taken bereavement for a series of time for the loss of a significant individual, let's just say a spouse or a child, on the anniversary of that date, be conscientious and also give them the time to either take time off or to be open to having a conversation with them about, how are you today? Is there anything that we can do to support you? So leaving that space again for conversations, and it helps the person to feel connected to you if you remember those important dates as well, that they're not just a name on a check somewhere, but they are actually a person that you care about, which only increases the integration of employees to stay in the workplace. I do not want to, in any way, shape, or form, reduce the importance of secondary loss. Sometimes the secondary loss can be even more overwhelming than the initial loss, especially when the initial loss is expected, but there may be financial loss. So it could be a spouse's income, burial costs, or unpaid bills, medical bills, college age kids being in school. There could be a series of different financial situations that they start to feel the burden of. This can be pre the loss as well. So if a person starts to show a series of change of behaviors or emotions, irritability, or emotional, just exposing a lot of different emotions, they may be anticipating that financial burden that is approaching. Location, sometimes a family member will need to relocate in order to get support. So if they were stationed somewhere where a spouse had a job, they may move closer to family to get that support if they have children in the home. They may need to look for a new job that pays more, or a better cost of living if you have young children and you are living in a city with a high cost of living. There's also the secondary loss of routine. And that can feel very chaotic, especially to children. So, the most important thing to do is to set normal routine times, even if it can be just a little thing each day, to kind of work children back into their environment. And so, if you have a million decisions to make for an approaching funeral or approaching memorial or whatever it may be, um, try to find one or two things that you can implement into a child's schedule that would be consistent and daily, so that they can feel that there is something positive to expect. So maybe it's that you sit down and you eat breakfast together every day. Maybe it is a dinner time prayer that you never skip. Maybe it's a hobby that you take time once a week to do together, something they can anticipate and feel some sense of normality. This section is very important for advocates. So, if you are thinking about being an advocate, or you are an advocate and bereavement is something new to you, I want you to think of this in two different categories. A person doesn't just always need advocacy after the loss, they may actually need advocacy before the loss. They don't know what to expect. There may be family conflict, especially when it comes to medical decisions of a loved one. There could be guilt involved. I don't know how to address the idea that I'm not going to have more time with my parent or whoever it may be. There may be a sense of fogginess or indecisiveness because they are just not emotionally prepared for what's ahead of them. There may be personal risk. There may be insurance or long term care needs that need to be addressed and decided on. They may need meals because they may not be able to leave someone's care. Maybe they can't afford secondary care, and so it is solely dependent on them and they can't leave the home. So think about those things as you are processing how to advocate for people. And then after the death, you may be participating with things like funeral arrangements, gift and condolence management. So a person doesn't necessarily want to answer every single call or text message or know what to do with an onboarding of help, even if it is from their church. So designating an advocate or a friend to advocate for them, to be able to manage that and to schedule that in a way that is helpful to the family if they want it. Okay. There are times where people try to be very helpful in these seasons, and what they really want is space, and what they really want is privacy, and they want quietness. And so they may not want someone else's cooked meal. They may not want anybody to be at the funeral, and that is their decision that they can solely make. You can participate in collecting thank you cards to give to them in exchange if people want to feel still connected to the situation. There may be some legal difficulties in closing up an estate. Again, family conflict. There may be mental health that needs to be advocated for. We see that you are not reintegrating back into the atmosphere of your normal routine, even after several months. And so we encourage you to seek more extensive care from an LPC or a therapist. And again, meals are on or off the table depending on what their preferences may be. So, where can volunteers be really helpful in this process? Volunteers are great with guilt counseling, that encouragement, that one to one listening. We listen again more than we ever speak because we just want people to process through their emotions and get to the other side of those feelings. The second is managing racing alternatives with constructive hobbies. So we may find that someone is just stuck in a cycle and they need to find a place to reintegrate back into something new. They may have lost their normality, things that they always did with someone that they loved or cared for. And now they have all of this energy that needs to go somewhere. So I'm so used to doing this every day for this person or this every day for this person, even if they were a caregiver for someone who was just aging at a normal pace. There wasn't a traumatic illness or anything. They just had been a caregiver for someone for several years. And now all of a sudden they find this newfound freedom of time and they don't really know what to do with that time. So you can be helpful in helping them find ways to integrate into hobbies that are of interest to them, not you, but to them. The third is scheduling grief. Oftentimes, especially if you have young children, there are moments that you process. I have to hold myself together. I cannot be emotional. I cannot let myself go because my kids are watching me. But if you hold that all in, you will just create a new set of emotions that you're not really proud of either. And that can be irritability or anger because you're not processing through the stages of grief. And so it's important that you schedule grief if you do have young children where you can set apart time. And even if that is sitting the kids down with some coloring pages and some crowns and saying, Mommy's going to be back in 30 minutes. I'm going to step into the other room. It could be after they go to bed. It can be while they're sitting down at the table eating dinner. Maybe you eat breakfast with them, but you skip dinner and you have a moment. Whatever it is that feels the most comfortable for that person, that they have a moment to process. It could be a cathartic cry or journaling positive memories. It could be just self-doubting thoughts. I wish I could have said this, so I'll say this. They could be lament prayers, whatever it feels, again, the most comfortable for them. So that's also a part of number 4, which is the journaling, the positive memories. And number 5 is not villainizing the lost, especially when lost can be the lost person's fault. So let's just say, for example, they were in a DUI accident and they were the drunk driver. If the child was troubled and committed suicide, if a person was breaking and entering into a home and died in the process, whatever it may be, that may be not the most ideal situation. Oftentimes people want to give people a sense of relief by saying, well, you did the best that you could. They were a lost soul or whatever it may be. It's still that person's child or that's still that person's loved one. And so again, we're there to listen, not to judge or to give any kind of subjective advice, unless it is strictly, they're dealing with a legal issue. And what do you think I should do to handle this? Or how should we respond? Well, let's get you in contact with someone that can help, again, non subjectively. Then we really don't need to be communicating about what we personally think about anything. And number 6 is releasing control while adjusting where necessary. So oftentimes we think that if we make a decision in grief that we have to stick to that. This is what I've been doing because this is what I was told to do. And so I'm going to continue to do it. But the truth is that if it's not working for your family, you can adjust. You have permission to adjust. If your kids are not adapting to a particular type of therapy, or if simply going to church is not working enough, you need a little extra help, then you can adjust. You can make layered decisions according to what each child or yourself needs. And so we want to encourage people to do that. And we don't want to continue to push them down a route that isn't working for them, because what may work for one of your grieving clients may be the worst idea ever for another. So again, we kind of allow them to be controlled in their route of the process of bereavement. We're going to take a look at some data here in this section. So mental health access, we're going to talk about some workplace data here. 40% of US-based companies have access to mental health services. So that is under 50%. And only 15% believe that their workplace supports mental health. So we want to have conversations, again, way ahead of time, way before we get to the point of needing them and needing those resources. And then we want to be really consistent about that as well. So you don't want to have upper management taking a month off to grieve, and then your policy is saying employees only get 3 days. So we want to be really consistent about what that policy looks like. And again, have those conversations ahead of time because they really affect productivity. Employees with untreated mental health conditions experience a 35% decrease in productivity. And such conditions can lead to a 50% increase in turnover, which we know is very costly, and it is very difficult on us to retrain people to bring them into the workplace. So we want to create atmospheres and good conversations to keep good employees, because the benefit is access to mental health services in the workplace can increase productivity by 31%. So we actually see a benefit all the way around when we do these things. So the why behind why do we even have these conversations? Workers with fair to poor mental health report about 12 days of unplanned absences annually, compared to the 2.5 days for those with better mental health. And so you can only expect someone to do so much in the 4 hours that they're outside of the workplace. Let's just say they work until 5. And then you calculate travel time. You're talking between 6 and 8 are really the prime times for them to really address anything at home. And if they have children or spouses, then you can decrease that by almost nothing. And so then we're saying, well, in that almost nothing time, you should be handling all of the stress that you have from your workplace environment. So we can be more conscientious of the decisions that we're making in the workplace and having more improved conversations about how to manage emotions in the workplace, then we will have better skilled workers. That's why more and more people are moving their work to home and doing it virtually, where they feel like they can be in more control of their environment to be able to process their emotions. Let's touch on the nonprofit or pastoral care. First point of contact means secondary trauma saturation. And so if you are going to do hospital visits with people who are dying or people that are processing death, you need to know that you are in the line of fire. And oftentimes we tell ourselves it's part of the job and it's just part of the environment and we're fine. and it's not our loved one, and we will go about our business and we're fine. The problem is that our bodies sometimes respond in secondary trauma before our mind does. Our mind is really, really good at being able to look past things. So when your body starts to have things like muscle spasms, TMJ, sleep issues, eating issues, there's a laundry list of secondary trauma that are in the back of my workbook if you have it. And I want you to always, 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 always be taking a look at that and just asking yourself, am I experiencing any of these secondary trauma things I need to be conscientious of? And do I need to, have the tune up? Do I need to go and see a doctor? Am I eating enough? Am I drinking enough water? Sometimes irritability and what feels like fatigue, which feels like you're not able to go any further, is actually just a lack of hydration. It could be a lack of, physical movement if you're sitting behind a desk for long periods of time, and so on and so forth. So just kind of taking a temperature as to, am I getting up enough? Am I sleeping enough? Am I drinking enough fluids? Am I doing things to take care of myself so that I can care for others? It's important. I also have a philosophy, even within our own home. We love to participate with discipleship, and we love to participate with our life groups, but we only do 2 full semesters. So we do a full spring semester and we do a full fall semester. And we've been asked so many times if they can extend it to summer, or can we do more of this? And our answer is clearly, with boundaries, we say no, because we have to have a season to refuel. We don't want to get to the point of burnout. We don't want to get to the point where we can't actually be our best selves for others, because then we're not helping anybody. And that only comes with time for us to evaluate anything that might be going on in our own bodies or minds or our home that we need to spend time on. And so pastors need to be doing the same thing. Active listening, let the grieving speak freely, resist the urge to fix their pain with platitudes. So, pastors are very tight on time. So, when they are doing visits, they are constantly thinking about the next place that they need to go to. But also, they have an internal sense to want to fix people and things. And so, they can emphasize on language that feels dismissive, and we want to be very conscientious of that spirituality being genuine and it not being, okay, I'm going to say something nice so I can move on to the next person. So if you do not have the time to actively listen, then maybe that is a micro ministry you need to develop that isn't solely dependent on you. And if you're going through it personally, if you're having to sit with a family member, that you try to be as present and realistically in the room as possible. In closing, I want to touch on some scripture that is important for us to be able to engage in the conversation of, what does grief look like? What's it supposed to look like as a Christian? One is that we are not called to steer away from emotions. We know that Jesus experienced many different emotions while he was here. He definitely had a moment where he wept, and he definitely had a moment where he expressed his true emotions. And so when we expect people to be anything less than human, we really take the creative part of God away by saying that he created robots that should just not understand their humanity at all. We don't want to worship the creation. We definitely want to worship the creator, but as he created. So he created us with emotions, and that is part of the human nature. Um, so I think that too many times we can kind of shoo those things away and tell people to just kind of like suck it up and move on. But we really want to allow space for them to feel, so that they can get through that emotion and be on the other side of it. In Psalm 34:18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. I want to emphasize in this verse that it says crushed in spirit. It does not say those who've lost someone and are doing just fine. So it acknowledges that people are going to have seasons of crushing, that they feel like their chest is caving in and their mind is at capacity. They feel like they can't take on any more water. And that feels incredibly overwhelming, and it feels very powerful in that season. Uh, Oftentimes, especially when you have a parent who's lost a child or a tragic accident, you're going to see that there are just moments of indescribable pain. And to allow anything less than that pain to be honest would be unchristian like to me, because that's not what he called us to be. He didn't call us to be zombies. He called us to be humans who long for a connection with the Creator. So in First Thessalonians 4:13, it says, "Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind, with who have no hope." And so that is our hope, right? But we're not supposed to bypass the humanity. So I think that Lamentations is an entire book very, very intentionally, and as well as Psalms, very intentionally put in the Bible so that people would understand what grief looks like. And that is being honest and labeling what grief is, and then being able to express openly your emotions, whether that be frustration, anger, whatever emotion you're going through in that moment, and then ending it with the hope of knowing that God sits on the throne and that He will um, ultimately be the ruler over all things on earth, and that He will be a God that gives you a path forward. And in those moments, you may not actually even truly believe those words, but you say them with the hope that you will feel and trust and learn to have faith in those words. And so sometimes just the practice of saying those things out loud: God, you sit on the throne. God, you are creator over everything. God, you are a healer. You can heal my heart. Those things over time will become very true to you, but only in adjacent to the honesty of how we feel. So He can't heal something we don't want to admit that we're feeling, because part of our relationship with God is conversing with Him. He wants to have a relationship with us. So we have to be able to communicate openly about what's actually going on with us so that He can be that transformer for us. I hope this helps in being able to have conversations about bereavement. If you are thinking about developing bereavement training or have more specific questions about implementing some of those policies, you can always reach out to us and learn more about Made to Walk at madetowalk.org.